Stanza 1. There was a roaring in the wind all night. The rain came heavily and fell in floods. But now the sun is rising, calm and bright. The birds are singing in the distant woods. Over his own sweet voice, the stock dove broods. The jay makes answer as the magpie chatters, and all the air is filled with pleasant noise of water. The poem has a typically Wordsworthian opening. This is not done. This is not metaphysical poetry. We don't meet with pyrotechnics. There is no attempt on the part of the poet to knock the reader off his balance. On the other hand, Wordsworth has provided the poem with a very beautiful, pleasant, calm opening. The poet tells us that the previous night had been a windy night. It had rained heavily. The place had become flooded. But now the sun is rising. The birds are singing. The birds are celebrating the rising of the sun. The poet specifically mentions three birds by name: the stock dove, the jay, and the magpie. The stock dove is a small European dove, a small dove common in Europe. The jay and the magpie are impressive birds, but they belong to the crow family. The stock dove, the jay, and the magpie are very common English birds and are often taken for granted by people. But here is a poet who knows them by name, who can identify them by the sounds that they make. The profound familiarity of the poet with the avian life of the region is revealed in the first stanza. Let us take a look at the last line of the stanza. And all the air is filled with pleasant noise of water. The poet is hinting at the fact that the rain has not completely stopped, or even if the rain has completely stopped, because it had rained so heavily the previous night that the water continues to drip. On the whole, the poet has provided the poem with an opening which perfectly suits the subject matter of the poem, the nature of the poem, and the personality of the poet. Stanza 2. All things that love the sun are out of doors. The sky rejoices in the morning's birth. The grass is bright with raindrops. On the moors, the hare is running races in her mirth. And with her feet, she from the plashy earth raises a mist that, glittering in the sun, runs with her all the way wherever she doth run. The second stanza amplifies on what has been said in the first stanza. Everything seems to be celebrating the sun. This is England. You must remember, this is not India. This is England, where the sun is prized, where sunlight is prized, where warmth is prized, and all things that love the sun are out of doors. The second line of the second stanza is a brilliant personification, one of the most brilliant personifications in all Wordsworth. The sky rejoices in the morning's birth. The morning is born, and the sky rejoices. Is the poet thinking of the sky as the mother, and the morning as the daughter, as the baby which is born? Are we overreading? It is not only a brilliant personification, it is also a brilliant transferred epithet, because it is the poet who is rejoicing, and he has transferred the attribute to the sky. The grass is bright with raindrops. The moors are open wasteland. The latter part of the stanza contains a detailed description of the hare and how it runs joyfully, raising a mist from the wet earth. The hare is a wild rabbit, and the detailed description of the joyful running of the hare reveals that the poet is an extremely keen observer of nature. The point that the poet is trying to make is that the flora and the fauna are all celebrating the rising of the sun. Stanza 3. I was a traveller then upon the moor. I saw the hare that raced about with joy. I heard the woods and distant waters roar, or heard them not, as happy as a boy. The pleasant season did my heart employ. My old remembrances went from me wholly, and all the ways of men so vain and melancholy. In actual life, Wordsworth loved to go for long walks through the countryside, and it was during one of those walks that he came across the hare running around in joy. The poet says that he heard the woods and the distant waters roar, or heard them not. Now that is slightly problematic. Did he hear the woods and the waters? Or did he not hear? The explanation is that he heard the woods and the waters, and he was so involved in the process of hearing the woods and the waters that he ceased to exist as an individual. And thus it can be said that he did not hear the woods and the waters. Another reading is that he was so happy that it did not matter to him whether he heard the woods and the waters or whether he heard them not. It was simply immaterial whether he heard them or heard them not. He was happy as a boy. His heart made full use of the very happy circumstances. His heart utilized completely the extremely pleasant circumstances, and unhappy memories went away from him. These memories are those associated with men, so vain and melancholy. The ways of men, so vain and melancholy. Vain means self centered. Vain means conceited. Vain means useless. Melancholy means sad, pensive, sorrowful. He forgot everything about men. He forgot all the memories that he had about men. The contrast here is between nature, which is a source of comfort, solace, joy to the poet, and men, association with whom has only resulted in giving the poet painful memories. Stanza 4. But as it sometimes chanceth from the might of joy in minds that can no further go, as high as we have mounted in delight, in our dejection do we sink as low. To me that morning did it happen so, and fears and fancies thick upon me came, dim sadness and blind thoughts I knew not nor could name. In this stanza, the thematic trend of the poem suddenly undergoes a sharp change. The poet explains that joy can sometimes be the gateway to sorrow. When you experience extreme joy and you realize that you cannot go any further, there is the risk of your falling back into a state of melancholy. The poet says that as high as we mount, so low do we sink. That precisely was what happened to the poet that morning. From excessive delight, he fell into profound dejection. The poet found himself overwhelmed by fears and fancies, overcome by negative imagination. He was not sure what the problem was. He experienced dim sadness, sadness which is vague, sadness whose causes cannot be identified, blind thoughts, thoughts which seemed meaningless, but thoughts none the same, and thoughts which succeeded in troubling him. The poet was not sure what was happening to him, but he understood that he was being overcome by a wave of melancholy. it would appear that the speaker is here suffering from a psychiatric condition called bipolar disorder. In bipolar disorder, the patient experiences extreme mood swings. When the poem began, the poet was riding high, but now in the fourth stanza, the poet finds himself overcome by a very powerfully negative imagination and subjected to extremely painful fears. Stanza 5. I heard the sky-lark warbling in the sky, and I bethought me of the playful hare. Even such a happy child of earth am I, even as these blissful creatures do I fare. Far from the world I walk, and from all care. But there may come another day to me, solitude, pain of heart, distress, and poverty. In the present stanza, the poet works out a subtle balance between his personality as a lover of nature, as a worshipper of nature, as a child of earth, as he puts it, leading a blissful life like the birds and the bees on the one hand, and the very real possibility of his undergoing extremely painful experiences on the other. What are these extremely painful experiences? Solitude, pain of heart, distress, and poverty. It is true that Wordsworth loved to live in remote villages. It is true that he loved to go for long walks through uninhabited moors. But it is also true that he craved for congenial company. He craved for the company of like-minded persons, such as his sister Dorothy Wordsworth, such as his wife Mary Hutchinson, such as fellow poets like S.T. Coleridge. And the very idea of losing such company was dreadful to him. Pain of heart. It can happen to any moment, any day. You can get up in the morning and find that there is a profound pain in your heart. The poet amplifies on this and mentions distress, extreme pain, extreme sorrow, and poverty. Wordsworth was no stranger to poverty. For long decades he lived in abject poverty, eating nothing but porridge, wearing nothing but the cast off clothes of his friends and relatives. The poet feels that though he now leads a blissful existence as a son of nature, There looms before him the very real possibility of his undergoing extremely, unbearably painful experiences.